Hello and welcome back to another episode of the FEZ show. We have had the Puebla E-Prix, the double header Puebla E-Prix, and boy have we got some talking points to go over today. Joining me, as always, over the next half an hour is Edward Hunter and Jack Pickering. Evening, boys, how are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Exciting weekend, a lot to get stuck into.
Yeah, hello Jack, hello Pico. I had a very good holiday in Scotland where I sort of watched a race from my room in a little corner. So I had a good time, but it was sort of like you get back from a meal in the evening, it's like, oh, I'm going to miss the race, I'm going to have to watch it on catch-up, which is not a usual situation for me. But yeah, really enjoyed the races and happy to get stuck into it, even though we get the usual, it seems, controversy to cover, haven't we?
It wouldn't be Formula E without a controversy. And let's just get into it, right? We've only got half an hour. So how this show's going to develop, it's effectively, we're just going to talk about the main key points from the race and also some talking points, because there's been some big news in the Formula E world as well. So let's just get straight into it. Pascal Wehrlein dominated. Fair to say, dominated Saturday, did incredibly well Sunday, but picked up 2 penalties, one on Saturday, one on Sunday. The Saturday one being the biggest of them all, because obviously he crossed the line in first on Saturday. He didn't win on Sunday, but won the race technically on Sunday, but was disqualified pretty much instantaneously once he crossed the line due to a technical infringement because the tyre allocation wasn't done effectively, a misclick or a double click. Something went wrong, and we'll get into that in a second. But for me, Pico, I think the first thing I want to discuss is this happens quite a lot in Formula E, really. You can go back to season 1, go back to season 4 with Lucas Di Grassi. Lucas Di Grassi's probably had a couple of them, to be fair. Daniel Abt as well. There's always seems to be some form of infraction which is highly minuscule in terms of performance, maybe not even performance enhancing, and a driver who's won a race has been disqualified. Surely Formula E and the FIA have to be talking to themselves at this precise moment and going, we need to change something. Something needs to be changed, a procedure, a rule. It needs to be changed because, yes, Formula E has the potential to be amazing. But when we're getting new fans watching each race and then they're seeing a driver being disqualified and they don't really understand why this driver has been disqualified. And when they're told, they're like, really, for that? That's why he's been disqualified? I really think something needs to change.
Yeah, this has happened far too much over the last few years. Yeah, obviously the one that came to my mind immediately was Daniel Abt in Hong Kong in season 4, where he won his first ever E-Prix on his birthday, and that was taken away from him because the barcode on one of the parts was different to the one that they'd submitted or something like that, and it would kind of similar. What they'd done is they'd submitted the files and they just misclicked something. Yeah, they do seriously need to look into this because the uproar on Twitter after the race was just massive, and even head honcho Mr. Big Alejandro Gag, like he was saying after the race, and I don't want to say that I'm quoting him, but I'm pretty sure that I read somewhere that he said that he wanted to kill someone. Don't take that for granted. If he didn't say that, he didn't say that. But
he definitely said it live on TV as well.
Okay, he did say that. Cheers, Ed. When you've got someone who has been so influential in this sport saying this should not be happening, that is when you really shouldn't have it happening in this sport. But yeah, so they need to look at this, especially for season. I think they need to focus on it for season 8 because we've only got 3 weekends left for season 7. But yeah, and the fact that we are now a world championship, we need to show that we are brilliant. Unlike and you know what? It's not the first time that we've had things that don't go our way, like in terms of this year. Well, obviously Valencia, we had the everyone running out of power, but yeah, there are multiple different sides of these rules and regs that Formula E and the FIA really need to drill down on, get this fixed, and then season 8 we can come back bigger and better and the drivers will still be moany and grumpy.
Yeah, and I think coming on to that, what Alejandro Agag said there, and you're right, the output on Twitter, it was so negative for Formula E. Like, Formula E are trying so hard to persuade new fans, to bring in new people, and then you get things like this that's still happening, which has been happening from season 1, because I remember the technical infraction Lucas Di Grassi got with, they had a damaged front wing, they tried to fix it so it would hold shape and be secure and wouldn't fail, but because of the way the mechanics had fixed it, Di Grassi was disqualified from that race and handed one of those wins to 2 post-race wins that Jerome D'Ambrosio got courtesy of Lucas Di Grassi. But, Ed, you've got more details and you've been doing the research and finding out a bit more about exactly what happened to Pascal Wehrlein. So I'll throw over to you now to sort of explain what happened.
Yeah, okay. So I think the best way of looking at it is, if you guys have ever been to college or university, you will know that whenever you hand in homework, they use a sort of online portal. I think when I went to college, it was called something called Moodle. I don't think Formula use the same thing, but it's similar in concept. It's an online portal. All the teams use it, and they submit the tyres that they're using. Now, if you remember back in Valencia earlier this season, because they were worried about tyre wear, they Michelin increased the number of tyres allocated to each team. I think they gave everyone an extra set basically, and they did the same thing at Puebla. And do you remember in qualifying in Valencia for the first race, Stoff Van Dorn lost pole position, was disqualified from qualifying, sent to the back of the grid because someone at Mercedes doing the admin, when they're entering the number in the technical passport, they put an extra digit in, and so it didn't match up obviously with the actual tyre, so he got sent to the back of the grid. And eventually, of course, he finished third through other shenanigans that happened that day. But we're not here to talk about that again. But what happened in Puebla to Wehrlein, Lotterer, and to the 2 Nissan Edams drivers, I believe, is especially at least from Porsche's end for both their drivers. What happened was they were submitting the details for the tyres they used in qualifying, and clearly they just double entered it for qualifying. They didn't submit any of the tyres they were using for the race. So clearly there was a misclick or some sort of miscommunication where they thought they'd sent it in for the race, but actually they hadn't. And that was why it only got sort of plugged. The first they knew about it was when Scott Elkin's race direction, the FIA, sort of realised, hang on, they've not submitted anything, and neither have Nissan, I assume. But we don't know exactly what Nissan have happened. But the odd thing to me is that Porsche are protesting it, which to me feels like this appeal that they're doing is kind of a waste of time, because they've admitted they made the administrative error. What they're sort of appealing is, the penalty, being disqualified, is too harsh. But because Daniel Abt and Lucas Di Grassi on 2 occasions disqualified for the Abt one I think is the most similar, because it was again a technical passport mix-up basically, where the digits on the motor and the inverter didn't match up with technical passport. I'm being very technical here, I'm sorry. But to me, because they disqualified Daniel Abt in Hong Kong, the sort of thing, you meant to do this thing but you didn't do it, so we'll let you off, feels like, Audi meant to put the right number on their thing too, and they got disqualified. Van Dorn, whoever's doing the admin there, meant to put the right number on there too. So I feel like they've boxed themselves in a corner, because if the punishment for getting the number on the passport wrong is disqualification, then that's got to be universal, right? They can't just make an exception for Pascal just because everyone likes Pascal. And I like him too. He's a very charismatic, popular driver who we always love seeing do well, and he did extremely well across the whole weekend in Mexico, and he's trying to see the positives of that. But obviously it's not the same when you don't get the points coming your way. But anyway, that's I didn't do a great job explaining that. That's the simplest way I can put it, really.
You did fine. But it was interesting because I remember speaking to some team PR people when these penalties for Daniel Abt happened and so forth, and I remember discussing it in the paddock a couple of seasons ago, and they were like, well, those penalties are fair because they broke the rules, and technically they have broken the rules because they didn't submit this thing, and every other team have had to do it. And if everybody other team have done it, therefore they've broken the rules, therefore they deserve it. And I remember discussing it at that time. I was like, but as a product, we don't want, to see people being disqualified or see race winners being disqualified for something trivial. So that's why I'm surprised that we've got to the stage where Formula E is now a world championship, and we haven't actually, decided or come to an agreement of how we can prevent these things from happening. Because you have to also remember that it's a one-day event. So so much is going on. It's not like Formula One. That's why people say, well, why does this not happen in Formula One? Like, you don't see Lewis Hamilton getting disqualified, after a race, or Max Verstappen, or, Lando Norris getting P3 and he's disqualified because they've made an error. It's because there's more time to make sure that it's all done and submitted properly, whereas in one day there's a rush and, things are done early nights, late nights, and mistakes can happen. So therefore, I'm surprised Formula E haven't put in something to say, or a system to say, right, if this has happened, or if you've made a mistake, there's a way to check it, or to, just something like, even like a tyre set numbers, like that's not a tyre set number that the FIA have given you, therefore you must have made a mistake, right? So like just something for the teams to go, you know what? Okay, I've made an error, let's fix it before anything else happens. I'm surprised something like that hasn't happened. But Pascal unfortunately got 2 penalties in this race, and the second one I'm not the biggest fan of, because he used fan boost. Now the penalty was that it was an irregular use or an improper use of fan boost. Now Pascal Wehrlein used fan boost on the final lap of the race, but because the battery couldn't give the output of the 250 kilowatts, or between the 240 and 250 kilowatts that is allowed, he was given a 5-second time penalty because he used fan boost, but he didn't get the power outage that he should have got effectively. Which I'm not a big fan of, because there's no penalty for not using fan boost. So at least we've got an initiative, Pico, where we've got something where the fans can have and can give a driver an extra power boost, and the driver then uses it, but he gets penalised for using it. Whereas other drivers who receive the vote get it, don't use it, no penalty whatsoever. Now there is a reason for this, and it's been widely debated for over the last couple of years, is that you couldn't use fan boost after 50% battery use of whatever the word is, I've forgotten, usable remaining energy after 50%, because it would kill the energy and it would kill the battery. So that's why they wanted drivers to put it in a certain way, and that's why, because Pascal's used it too late, that he hasn't got it, and he's got that 5-second penalty. But by the by, right, with that explanation there, maybe we're all struggling slightly on explanations today, I still don't think that is worth a penalty. If he's used fan boost and it hasn't worked, at least he's used it and he hasn't got the benefits from it. That's his problem. That can't be worth a 5-second penalty.
Yeah, answer on a postcard, please, everyone. But yeah, it's disappointing, I think. And this is the thing with the rulings in Formula E. You do get these really kind of like unfair, not really deserved penalties, which is quite annoying. As far as I'm aware, the rule with fan boost is that you can use up to 50 kilowatts more power for 5 seconds. So to me, that means anywhere between 0 and 50. So if they implement that, surely, as long as he uses somewhere in between there, that should be fine. So for me, definitely the penalty is not worth. The penalty doesn't fit the crime, and so yeah, I think this and it goes back to Formula E and the FIA. They need to crack down on these rules and little loopholes. Spend between the checker flag in Berlin until FP1 in Saudi Arabia, probably December this year, I think or January. It might even be into next year. We're not sure. Calendar comes out in a few weeks' time, so we'll be able to know soon. But yeah, they need to look at these rules and properly analyse and make sure that there isn't anything, because I mean, as you said, Jack, we want to get new fans watching, and they'll watch it. And they watched on Saturday night Pascal Wehrlein dominate in Puebla. For him, about 5 seconds after he crossed the finish line, for him to go for his timing thing on the timing tower to drop from 1st to 24th, and Jack's having to tell everyone he's been disqualified actually. So yeah, it is irritating.
What do you think, Ed? Penalties for fan boost. I think this is something, if we're going to go with fan boost and if we're going to keep it, we should be encouraging it and encouraging drivers to use it, and maybe trying to implement penalties for not using fan boost, maybe.
Yeah, I think it was weird because the disqualification, I felt it obviously, someone in the admin team misclicking and not submitting the right numbers for the tyres for the right session doesn't affect Pascal in terms of performance, because it's not like he's got magic tyres all of a sudden. But as the letter of the law, it's draconian. You've got to penalise. Whereas the fan boost thing, what Pascal did was he was told obviously very late to use it, and because he didn't really have the necessary power to really use it and sort of get to the end of the race, essentially, he decided to go into a SOC, state of charge. So he was using fan boost, but not at 250 kilowatts. I think it was like 160 or something quite low, basically, just to make sure that he wasn't using energy at an excessive rate. But I think the law is if you go into fan boost, you have to use it at 250 kilowatts. It didn't used to be that way. There used to be a sort of thing where, they would say, sometimes drivers can use fan boost strategically as sort of use it over a longer period but at a lower charge, and they don't do that anymore. It's literally just nope, you have to use it 250, and if you don't, then this is what happens, unfortunately. Which it's a bit silly, and I have a bit more sympathy with the team and Pascal actually on this one, because they were sort of damned if they did and kind of and damned if they didn't, really, because they've got this such a weird outline of the rules where they're sort of encouraged to use fan boost, but if they don't use it in exactly the right way, then they're kind of penalised. And the fact is, with the vote changing so late, you only really realise you've got fan boost so late in the race. That how do you plan that into your race strategy? If you're like Van Dorn or Costa, you can of course do that. But if you're Wehrlein, then it's kind of 50-50 whether you're going to get it or not. 22 minutes into the race when the vote gets announced, and there's so much about fan boost that I feel does so much more harm than good for the sport in terms of its image, and I think this is another classic example of that. In fact, to be honest, with the 5-second penalty, it really, you would normally expect this kind of violation to get like a drive-through or something, which would have been like 40 seconds in Puebla. So to only get off for 5 seconds, get away with fourth, I think Pascal actually kind of got pretty lucky there. Maybe they were being lenient because of the fallout from yesterday. Thought if we disqualify him again, then we'll get a Twitter pylon on us again, although Twitter pylon shouldn't really be influencing the stewards' decisions, in my opinion. If it looks bad for the sport, well, that can't really be helped, but the rules are the rules. And if you're a world championship, I would argue the rules are more important, not less important, in my opinion. But yeah, still, it's silly. It didn't look great, and in the end, everyone feels a bit sorry for Pascal, I think, and why shouldn't they?
For me, it just encourages teams not to use fan boost. And then what's the point of fan boost? But that, we've had 18 minutes pretty much on Pascal Wehrlein. So let's move on to qualifying. Because I think this was another story of the day. Another story, and we're going back to Saturday when, they're all racing effectively for the outlap to cross the line. They cross the line with 2 seconds. Then Robin Freinzer locks up into turn one, completely butchers everybody's laps, and then they're all starting at the back, and we think, well, what on earth were we watching here? And I'm just thinking, Pico, we've had this qualifying system now, and it's been praised. I remember, season 5, I had my doubts about it, and then I see the good side of it, and you can see how it mixes up the grid and how it creates an entertaining race. But now that we've had it for like 3 seasons, I feel like time is enough on it, and we've got to come up with a new system that actually makes it feel like qualifying, because I just feel like the championship is being determined way too much on qualifying, because Group 1 is at such a disadvantage that is creating this tight championships with the likes, no offence to Edoardo Mortara, but really and truly Venturi should not be leading this championship at this stage of the season. But here we are, and he is, and that's mainly down to the qualifying system and maybe a bit of luck with penalties here and there. But those drivers like Antonio Felix da Costa, Jean-Eric Verne, Stoffel Van Dorn, Nick de Vries, who have been brilliant at the start of the year, who've got the car to do it, are just being penalised far too much. So for me, I think it needs to change. Pico, what do you think?
It definitely needs at least a revamp. I think now we've moved into these 4-minute qualifying sessions instead of the original 6. I feel like there is now more time. I feel like we're getting Super Bowl. I think the Super Bowl session starts at 25 to 1 local time now, because the final session's at like finishes finishes like just before half past. It's so early now. So one thing that I'd probably propose is, instead of having 4 qualifying groups of 6 cars, have 6 qualifying groups of 4 cars, and then if that still doesn't work, have a kind of like adaptation of the MotoGP qualifying format where they base it on practice time. So if you're in the top 10, you get to go through into Q2, and then if you're in and then if you're in Q1, the top 2 go through. If we can adapt that to Formula E, maybe to have like 3 qualifying sessions to make up for the 24 cars or something like that, which would still reduce, and then just have them have like still have it as like a mini practice session. But if you still want them to have like 1 lap at 250, sure. If they want 1 lap at 250, sure. But it needs a bit of adapting.
I discussed that qualifying system with Sam Bird. I remember having this conversation about the MotoGP qualifying system with him, and he said it wouldn't work because the traffic that you get in FP2, for example, in practice and setting, and not everyone gets a clean 250 laps, so it would be unfair to penalise people who got blocked or red flag or couldn't get their 250 kilowatt lap in practice to then do a MotoGP style qualifying system. So it's an interesting idea. I kind of like the idea of it, Pico, but as I said, I've spoken to Bird about it, and they're the drivers, and they're the ones that are going to sort of, and I reckon that will probably be shared across the majority of the drivers, that view. But Ed, for me, I still think if you're a new fan and you come to qualifying, you think, wow, if you saw that qualifying session between Friends locking up and all that madness, you think, wow, what a qualifying system. But is it fit for purpose? Is it a qualifying session?
Well, yeah, because they all set times and it decides a grid order. But in terms of what you're getting at, I think is this is spectacle over sport, right? Where we set up this really entertaining grid for the race, and all the Group 1 runners, they're not necessarily, doomed, but it does make their job rather more difficult. For instance, I think Nick de Vries actually had a really good performance across the whole weekend, because in the first race, Friends took him out. Dive bombed and got it wrong, locked on the brakes and spun de Vries around, and then de Vries, I think, had to pit for a puncture. I might be in the second race, I'm getting mixed up, but de Vries basically recovered up to 9th, I thought, did a really good drive, wasn't too far behind Van Dorn in the end, his teammate. And then in the Sunday race, de Grassi basically just went into the rear of him and took him out, which is the sort of thing that can happen when you qualify badly because you're on the green track and being held up by the other Group 1 runners, and you've got Lucas de Grassi behind you who's decided that he's going to smash into people rather than win races. But he was a bit of a wrecking ball on Sunday, unfortunately, but which is a shame because he did really well on Saturday. But I think in terms of spectacle, it does deliver in the race. It doesn't make it impossible for the Group 1 runners to come through. We have seen on occasion the cream rise to the top, which I think is the idea of the system, but it does stack the odds against them. It leads to this really competitive kind of order. We've worried in the end that it's sort of a... Sam Bird was talking about this in Puebla. He said, well, at least I got crashed out, and we can maybe talk about the attack mode rejoin briefly, but he got crashed out on the Mahindras, and he said, well, at least I'll be in Group 2 tomorrow, so I might get a better qualifying. And in the end, he qualified 15th anyway, so it didn't make a huge difference for Sam Bird. But so I don't think being in a high group necessarily guarantees you'll get into Superpole. But I agree that maybe things could be fairer on the Group 1 runners. But the problem with Formula E is it's really, especially if you've got a group system, it's going to be really, really difficult to get it fair for everyone unless you have, like you say, a big session where everyone running on track at the same time. But then you've got tons of other problems with the tracks being overcrowded, especially street tracks, possibilities of red flags like we've seen in Formula 1 qualifying sessions recently in Monaco and Azerbaijan this year. So yeah, it's a bit of a difficult situation, and I don't think I have the answer in my hands at the moment. But if I did, I would share it with you. But yeah, I see where you're coming from, Jack. I enjoy the spectacle for what it is. I would love to see it a bit more fair, but unfortunately, it is what it is, and I think the drivers just got to get on with it.
Yeah, I just think as a spectacle, though, it's just becoming a tad little old and also frustrating to watch everyone leaving at the same second, everyone crossing the line with 1 second to go, and everyone fighting tooth and nail on a qualifying lap. I don't want to see that on a qualifying lap. I want to see that in the race, which we do see in the race. I want to see the best drivers go up against each other to set the fastest lap possible, and I just don't think Formula E qualifying does that.
Well, what you're describing sounds a lot like Super Bowl, but the problem is, like you say, it's getting into Super Bowl, which is the bit that's a little unfair.
For me, I wouldn't mind a system where it's F1 2005, where they go out one by one, and that's how the grid's formed. Because at least then that the leader championship goes out first. There's no, and at least then everyone does their lap. No one's sort of impacted with traffic or people locking up right in front of them because they're 1/10 in front of them crossing the line. Pico.
Yeah, one thing that I was going to point out was that in Moto E, the electric version of MotoGP, they do have E-Pole, which is what they go out one, and they do go out one after another, but it's based on reverse practice time. So if you are, I believe there's 18 in Moto E, so if you are 18th, you will go out first, and then it goes all the way up to first place. And yeah, it is a bit like a Super Bowl, but at the same time, watching it doesn't have that same kind of like thrill that other qualifying systems do. And so I do think, yeah, as we've alluded to, something does need to change, but it's hard to put a finger on it.
Formula E are caught between, what is it, a hard and a rock place? I don't know, I can't remember.
Yeah, that's it, rock and a hard place. You had it the other way around.
Yeah.
This episode's hurting my head. It's like the Extreme E format.
Yeah, it is. It's very much. So where are we from here? And you mentioned Lucas Di Grassi there, and I think we should mention him very briefly, like winning the race on Saturday, obviously taking advantage of it. He's been on the receiving end of disqualifications, getting himself, but he's also taken advantage of some. And a driver who's looking for a seat, he's doing amazingly and winning races, and he's super consistent. Yes, the Sunday race probably wasn't his finest, but overall, Lucas Di Grassi this season has been Lucas Di Grassi, gets that car into the points from a bad starting position and is doing a great job. But Edoardo Mortara now leads this championship, and it's incredibly tight. Now, with this qualifying system, I'm moving away from it slightly, but I feel like this is crunch time, right? And you've got someone like a Stoffel Van Dorn right now who's in Group 2 in qualifying and who can elevate him up. He's got that, they've done their laps. This is his time to go up there, get back into the top 5 potentially, and then go and win a race and put himself back into the championship frame. When we didn't really see in the 6 races in Berlin, Pico, like someone who sort of came from the midfield close to the championship, because the Costa already had a decent gap at that stage. But with the championship as tight as it is, when are you expecting this championship to be won? Like, are we going to see someone come out who we haven't expected, who's in these Group 2, Group 3 qualifyings, who's going to make a surge, who could easily make a surge in New York and London to put himself in a position in Berlin when they can win the title? Or do you think those people who have still been in Group 1 all this time, the Van Dorns, the Frees of this world, the Da Costas, they're still going to come out on top and win this championship?
The first ever Formula E World Champion will go into Saturday qualifying in Berlin in Group 2. That is, I'm saying that now. That's my bold prediction. I'm not even going to watch it. I'm away camping that weekend. But yeah, this qualifying system, yeah, it heavily influences it, and I think, yes, Edoardo Mortara at the moment has the biggest lead that anyone has had over the course of the entire season so far, I think. But I can't. He will be in Group 1 for the entirety of the New York weekend. I reckon he will be in Group 1 for the entirety of the London weekend as well. There's a small chance he could be in Group 2 going into Berlin. But at the same time, he could easily be in Group 1. I'm not sure. I'm genuinely not sure. This is the tightest championship that we've had yet. And yeah, it is quite dependent on qualifying. And that's probably why it needs to change. But yeah, I mean, it's great. It's great that Edo, because he is a bit of an underdog. He's someone who's always there, but never right there. He's someone who, one thing that I always noticed in his first couple seasons in Formula E, he turned up for Hong Kong, and then the rest of them he'd kind of pitter-patter around like the lower end of the points, and that was more or less what he'd do. Obviously, he was taken out. He spun out of his. I want to say that was a double header in that year in Hong Kong, and that was the Sunday race that he spun out of, and Daniel Abt took the win, as we've alluded to. In the end, he didn't. But yeah, it's great to see him up there. But now he's so far ahead in the and I'm saying so far ahead in the championship. He is 10 points ahead in this championship. But for this season, that is so far ahead, and I don't see a way that Edo will be in that title fight on, I want to say, Sunday the 15th of August. Yes, it is, because my birthday is the week after. I can work it out from there.
Yeah, I think, honestly, if you're in Group 1 and you're a Venturi at this precise moment, Venturi have got a solid powertrain. Like I said earlier, that they probably shouldn't be up there, and I stand by that, because I feel the Mercedes should be up there. I feel the Tech Cheetahs should be up there, even possibly the Nissans with Oliver Rowland, for example, and Jaguar possibly as well with Bird and Evans, because they had a great start to the season. Venturi have been very consistent, and consistency, I've always said, is key in this championship with the qualifying group, so I can't really slate Venturi too much. But I do feel now that he's in Group 1, this will be the end of his title challenge. I feel like it'll be very difficult for Edoardo Mortara now to push into Super Bowl, push into those top 10s, going into the remaining 6 races of the championship. And I think someone like a Van Dorn or a Bird who slips into that Group 2 scenario, jumps up and can get a good result, because there's only one good result. You know, Mortara just doesn't need to score. To be fair, though, you're right that he could still be in Group 1, but Mortara could not be leading the championship come the end of Saturday's race in New York, you know, just if he qualifies in Group 1 and he's out. So really interesting, but I'm going to move on quickly, because there has been some really interesting news which we're going to end on, and that's Oliver Rowland. Now, the race has reported that Oliver Rowland is set to leave Nissan, Ed, and move to Mahindra. Now, that shocked me personally, because I'm like, okay, Oliver Rowland, and we were talking about this actually as a collective group on the weekend, that Oliver Rowland's one of those drivers that he's so good, right? And he is probably a little bit under, you know, I don't think underrated is the wrong word, but underprivileged. Like he's not really taken into account. Like,
he doesn't get the plaudits he always deserves.
Yeah, exactly. He doesn't get what he deserves sometimes. And he's always there. He's been there season 5. He's been there in Nissan ever since he's come in. He's been brilliant. And I'm thinking, okay, so when I heard that he was leaving, I was like, okay, this has got to be for a big team. And you're looking around the paddock and you're thinking, where could a seat be available? And then my first inkling came to Porsche, because Andre Lotterer, as I said, mad respect for Andre Lotterer, but he hasn't had the greatest of seasons. He is age-wise getting on. He might be thinking about doing other things. And his performance this year hasn't been the Andre Lotterer that we got to know very well in that Tech Cheetah role. And even last year in Porsche, he was getting an odd podium here and there. And it hasn't really happened this season. So I was thinking, okay, that could be a good move for Rowland. Wehrlein, Rowland, great partnership, right? That's a really strong driver pairing going forward for Porsche and building on what they've done so far. But for me, Mahindra, again, confusing, because Alexander Sims and Alex Lynn, to be fair to them, both new to this season for Mahindra and both doing a great job. Like Sims, who struggled a little bit in BMW, has had moments where he's been absolutely brilliant and has been better than Lynn over the course of the season. And we all know how much Lynn is loved in Formula E. So I feel like Mahindra had something good there, something that they could work on, a 2 decent driver lineup there. But obviously adding Rowland's brilliant, but I feel like that's quite harsh on either Sims or Lynn. We don't know who's losing their seat potentially if this story is true. That's something else that we need to consider, that this story may not be true, or it may not be as confirmed as the race seemed to be calling it. But for me, I don't know if that's the right move for Rowland.
Yeah, it's an interesting scenario for sure, and what this of course could be just Sam Smith from the race pulling our leg as he. Well, I don't think it's intentional or anything. It seems that if that's the rumours he's hearing, and that's what they report, so there may be some truth to it. You know, Sam Smith tends to be pretty accurate, but why would Rowland leave Nissan? I think that's the big question. He was brought in to replace Alex Albon as a sort of. I think a lot of us assumed he would be sort of a stopgap, a sort of temporary solution, and then he delivered. He was getting pole positions, podiums in season 5. He won a race at the very end of season 6, the penultimate round in Berlin, and was extremely impressive, and has continued being impressive. We all saw that when he got pole position last time out in Puebla. But the thing we've been hearing is that Buemi, who's had a pretty abysmal season, results-wise at least, had only flashes of pace here and there, whereas Rowland has been the one getting the points in. Buemi's on a much more financially attractive deal than Oliver Rowland. That's what we know for sure, definitely. And Buemi is signed for next season, I believe, with Nissan Edams, whereas Rowland was not. So I think Nissan Edams wanted to keep Rowland, but for whatever reason, negotiations fell through. So then it becomes a question of why does Rowland go to Mahindra? He drove for Mahindra before to fill in when Nick Heidfeld sprained his wrist in Putrajaya many seasons ago when driving for Mahindra back in season 2, I think, very early in that season. Oliver Rowland was put in, and it was the middle of his, I think it was just before he started driving in what was then GP2 and is now Formula 2. He was focused on that with Dams, funnily enough. And basically he filled in, sort of was running at the back and sort of just getting some experience in. But he definitely got to know some of the Dilbag Gill at least and the leadership at Mahindra. They clearly liked him, and now he's become a free agent again. Dilbag, obviously he's only just lost Pascal Wehrlein, let's not forget. So he wants a new star signing. Sims was certainly a star signing because he was a race winner, and Alex Lynn was sort of put in. We were sort of wondering whether Lynn would get the seat or not, and in the end he did because he performed pretty well in Berlin. So like you say, it becomes a question of if this is true. Which Alex gets the drop then? A lot of people are just saying, well, of course they're going to lose Alex, aren't they? It's like, which Alex though? They don't specify. But it would seem, I think, with Sims being the star signing, he's got the podium in Rome. I thought he's had some very impressive performance and some bad luck, which has meant he's not quite. Him and Lynn, I think, are quite similar in points at the moment, but Sims is like about 3 or 4 ahead, I think, over the course of the season so far, and would be maybe slightly further ahead if he hadn't got taken out in a few rounds and had some misfortune. But I wouldn't be surprised if Lynn gets the drop again, which is a shame because I do really like Alex, and I think, like you say, he's doing a great job, got the podium in the second race at Valencia. But Rowland is clearly turning into a bit of a star in Formula E, and perhaps what he's being paid at Mahindra, sorry. And it's a team on the, let's not forget, Mahindra have got ZF doing the powertrain, big German company. And they've got a big facility in the UK. I think they're investing a lot in that facility. So definitely there's been an offer that's been made to Rowland that's attractive, and I think that would be why. So it's not as behind Nissan as you might expect, and they're certainly ahead of Nissan in the points at the moment due to Buemi not pulling his weight, so to speak, or having a bit of misfortune, wherever you want to put it. But yeah, so I think that's why Rowland has gone for Mahindra. I think it's actually a pretty good move, and it may well pay out.
Pico, just a couple of words, your views on Rowland to Mahindra?
Yeah, obviously it's a bit of a surprise because he seems to be the number one at Nissan at the moment in terms of performances. But yeah, I think he'll have more perks, so to say, at Mahindra than he would at Nissan. But honestly, I was watching last weekend and I was going to come on here and go, Buemi's not gonna race next year at Nissan Edams. I don't see it happening. He's just had such a lackluster season that I wouldn't be surprised if Edams have a brand new lineup next year. But that's something to talk about for another day.
It's interesting to see how Sebastian Buemi. Maybe that's another show that we could do. You know, especially towards the off seasons, like what has happened to Sebastian Buemi, because you can't remember, he dominated. He could have easily been triple champion in the first 3 seasons, and it's just completely fallen away from him. But
runner up in season 5 too as well.
Yeah, exactly. So like He's had spurts, but like it's just season 6 and season 7. It's just not gone his way. Boys, we are rapidly running out of time. I just want to mention as well, just for the show, obviously Edoardo Mortara, yes, he's leading the championship, did do incredibly well as well in that Sunday race to win it. I think that's also important to mention. I know we're sort of like saying, okay, like we don't expect him to, even though he's leading the championship by 10 points, we're not expecting him to be in the title fight come. He might still be there, but I still don't believe, and people might think that's a bit harsh considering how well he did on Sunday. But I just think the Venturi hasn't shown enough over the course of the season to say that they could be champion potentially. But as I said, that's no disregard on Edoardo Mortara's quality. We all know what an amazing driver he is, and what he was doing in the Venturi before it had the Mercedes powertrain. Yeah. Because he was always doing bits.
Let's not forget, by the way, just very quickly, Mortara. We were talking about his consistency earlier. He has had 4 non-scores this season. Usually in Formula E, if you get 1 or 2 non-scores, that's it. You're out of the title fight because it's such a short season compared to many other championships. But he's had 4 non-scores. Freins, I think, has had 5 non-scores. So it's really been either he finishes on the podium or he doesn't finish in the points, Mortara. So not quite. Consistency is hard to come by this season.
Yeah, and it just shows how important a race win this season is. A race win just completely turns the record book upside down. And that's the interesting thing going into these final 6 races, because the way it's stacked at the moment, it's anyone's championship. Come on, Oliver Turvey. Come on, Neo. Because, get that car going. Who knows? 2 wins. You'll be there. But anyway, boys, thank you so much for coming on today. Really enjoyed it.
I mean, you said at the start of the season, Jaguar would be nowhere, so I'm looking forward to that prediction coming true. Jack, cheers for the show.
Yeah, and before I sign off, I just want to say well done to Nick Cassidy getting that first podium for Virgin. He was incredible to watch on the Sunday race, and I can't wait to see what he can do in the future.
I suppose these shows, to wrap up Formula E and talk out all the talking points, you need about 6 hours. We need like a 6-hour show, which is there's just so much to talk about. But yeah, Nick Cassidy obviously doing amazingly. Thank you so much for watching the FEZ show. If you are enjoying the content, please hit the like and subscribe buttons on your various platforms that you can listen to this amazing show on. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you soon. Bye.